In an emotional tale of betrayal and redemption, follow the journey of Rosario Salazar, a 75-year-old woman whose quiet life is drastically transformed when her own children abandon her. Determined to leave a legacy of love and forgiveness, Rosario surprises everyone by revealing a secret in her will, a hidden treasure that goes beyond jewels, containing precious memories and buried stories. Rosario Salazar, a 75-year-old woman, faces solitude in her humble home, where each object seems to whisper memories of a life full of love and sacrifice. After decades dedicated to raising her children, Martín and Camila, now adults, she finds herself alone, a solitary silhouette in the twilight of a tranquil evening. Sitting at the kitchen table, Rosario sifts through her recollections as the clock on the wall marks the slow passage of time. "Martín, Camila," she whispers, looking at the yellowed photographs scattered on the table. The voices of children playing in the garden echo in her mind, contrasting with the present silence. In the corner of the room, an empty chair seems to await the return of the children who left in search of their own paths. Rosario remembers the nights she lulled them to sleep with stories of adventures and dreams, now as distant as the stars in the night sky. "Where are you now?" she murmurs, her voice echoing in the emptiness. The loneliness becomes palpable, but Rosario does not give up. Determinedly, she gets up and goes to the bookshelf where she keeps the family albums. Flipping through the pages worn by time, she relives moments of joy, birthday parties, and tight hugs that warmed her heart. However, even with the memories, the weight of absence is overwhelming. "I will always be here waiting for you," she says to the photographs, letting a solitary tear fall. Rosario Salazar feels her heart race when she hears familiar knocks on the door, echoing like a memory long kept. Slowly, she approaches and, with trembling hands, opens the door. There stand Martín and Camila, her children now adults, with nervous smiles on their faces, carrying the burden of years of distance and regret. "Rosario," Martín begins, his voice choked with contained emotion. Camila holds his hand, her moist eyes reflecting a mix of guilt and hope. Rosario watches them for a moment, letting the unspoken words flow between them, filling the space with the silent promise of a new beginning. "Come in, my dears," Rosario finally murmurs, her voice soft as a whisper loaded with forgiveness. Martín and Camila cross the threshold of the house they once called home, now flooded not only by the sunlight streaming through the windows but also by the long-awaited reconciliation. Sitting around the kitchen table, they share stories of the past and present, laughing and crying in equal measure. Rosario looks at her children, seeing traces of the young ones they once were, but also recognizing the adults they have become. "You are missed, you know," Rosario murmurs, holding Camila's hand lovingly. "But now you're here, and that's all that matters." Martín smiles, a smile that carries years of longing and regret. "Mom, we are so sorry. For everything." Camila wipes away a tear, squeezing Rosario's hand. "We shouldn't have distanced ourselves like that." Rosario shakes her head gently. "What matters is that we're together now. That's all that matters." In the days that follow, Martín and Camila visit regularly, bringing with them not just their physical presence, but also the promise to rebuild what time and circumstances had separated. Together, they rediscover the strength and beauty of forgiveness, transforming Rosario's loneliness into a symphony of reunion and renewed love. Rosario Salazar looks around the house that has been her refuge for so many years, the simple furniture and corners that hold not just objects, but precious memories. Martín and Camila stand by her side, looking at her with tenderness and a proposal that carries both love and concern. "Mom, we thought maybe it's time for a change," Martín suggests, his eyes fixed on hers with the seriousness of someone who wants the best for his mother. Rosario blinks, processing the words as her heart stirs with the idea. A change? To where? To Mexico City. Camilla responds softly, holding Rosario's hand with care. There we can be closer to each other, take care of you, and spend more time together. Rosario feels a whirlwind of emotions. The idea of leaving behind her home, filled with memories and comfort, is frightening. But there is also the appeal of being close to her children, sharing more moments, and never feeling the loneliness that has enveloped her for so long. It's a difficult idea, Rosario confesses, her eyes welling up with unshed tears. This house. It's where I watched you grow up. Martine kneels beside her, holding her hands with firmness and tenderness. Mom, what matters is not the place, but being together. We can create new memories, start a new chapter. Camilla nods, her eyes shining with determination. And we can make this next chapter the most beautiful one possible. Rosario looks at her children, seeing not just responsible adults, but the same babies and children she raised with so much love. A trembling smile appears on her lips. Maybe. It's time for a change then, she finally murmurs, a mix of fear and hope in her voice. In the days that follow, Martine and Camilla help Rosario prepare for the move, packing precious memories and looking forward with anticipation. As the house slowly empties, Rosario's heart fills with gratitude for having such loving and courageous children. Rosario Salazar feels her heart tighten when she realizes they are not heading to the new home her children promised. Instead, the car stops in front of an imposing building where the sign "Nursing Home" gleams coldly in the sunlight. She looks at Martine and Camilla, their faces now obscured by the shadow of betrayal hanging between them. What is happening? Rosario asks, her voice trembling with contained emotion and growing sadness. Martine looks at the ground, unable to find the words. Camilla holds Rosario's hand, her eyes filled with tears of guilt and unspoken apologies. Mom, Camilla begins, but her words are cut off by the painful silence that fills the air between them. Rosario feels the weight of betrayal settle in her chest, as if the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. She refuses to get out of the car, her gaze fixed on the building that represents not a new beginning, but the breaking of a promise made with love and care. You deceived me, Rosario finally murmurs, her voice choked with the pain of disappointment. Why? Martine finally raises his eyes to meet hers, the anguish visible on his face. Mom, we thought it would be better for you. Safer, easier. We just wanted the best. Martine's words echo in the void between them, but they cannot dissipate the sense of betrayal that Rosario feels so deeply. She feels betrayed not just by the unexpected change of plans, but by the lack of trust and the breaking of the mutual care bond she believed she shared with her children. I trusted you, Rosario whispers, her eyes filling with tears she struggled to hold back. I thought we would be together. Camilla sobs, unable to bear the weight of the hurt she helped create. Mom, please. We didn't mean to hurt you. Rosario closes her eyes for a moment, seeking strength to face the reality now unfolding before her. She knows she needs to find a way to forgive her children and perhaps even understand their reasons, but the fresh wound in her heart still burns with the pain of betrayal. Despite the initial pain and sense of betrayal, Rosario Salazar finds a new beginning in the nursing home. Initially reluctant to integrate, she gradually discovers that there is a space of human warmth and new opportunities. While exploring the quiet corridors of the home, Rosario meets Dona Ana, a lady with a welcoming smile who shares life stories and experiences with her. Together, they find comfort in each other's company, forming a friendship that grows stronger every day. Rosario, dear, you must try the book club, Dona Ana exclaims excitedly one day, holding a worn-covered book. It's a great way to meet people and have fun at the same time. Rosario reluctantly agrees, and soon finds herself engaged in lively discussions about books, poetry, and shared memories. She rediscovers her passion for reading and exchanging ideas, finding renewed joy in the welcoming community that surrounds her. Beyond the regular activities, Rosario also finds comfort in conversations with Mr. Javier, a war veteran with a resilient spirit and a collection of fascinating stories. Their talks, filled with wisdom and humor, help Rosario find new and valuable perspectives on life. Over time, the nursing home transforms into a place where Rosario not only lives but flourishes. She finds joy in the small moments shared with her new friends, learning to appreciate each day as a precious gift. Emotionally and unexpectedly, Rosario Salazar discovers an old chest in the basement of the nursing home, a chest that reveals secrets of a previous life unknown to her. Carefully opening it, her eyes light up with the sparkle of precious jewels, gleaming gold and sparkling diamonds. "My God," she murmurs to herself, unable to believe the wealth she finds there, a treasure hidden for so long. The pieces are beautiful and intricate, each telling its own silent story of a past era. As Rosario examines each item with reverence, her trembling hands trace the contours of bracelets, rings, and necklaces. Each piece seems to tell a story of love, sacrifice, and perhaps even secrets that now emerge from the shadows of the past. Donna Ana, curious about Rosario's excitement, enters the basement and stops at the sight of the treasure displayed before them. Her eyes widen with surprise and fascination. "Rosario, you found something incredible!" Donna Ana exclaims, her voice echoing with genuine admiration. "These jewels must have a story to tell." Rosario nods, an incredulous smile playing on her lips. "It's as if the past is finding me here, as if I were part of something bigger than I imagined." As she and Donna Ana explore the contents of the chest, Rosario begins to imagine the stories behind the jewels, wondering who owned them and why they were hidden there. Each piece becomes not just a symbol of material wealth, but a window into a mysterious past now unfolding before her. With her heart full of gratitude and love for her family, Rosario Salazar decides to include Sofia, Carlos, and their children in her will. After discovering the treasure in the nursing home's basement and reflecting on her life and experiences, she feels it's time to share her fortune with those she loves. With the help of a lawyer from the home, Rosario drafts her will clearly and carefully. She allocates half of her fortune to Sofia, Carlos, and their children, acknowledging the support and affection they have given her over the years. The other half is designated for the nursing home itself, to benefit the residents who have become her new family. "It's my way of ensuring you have a secure and prosperous future," Rosario explains to her loved ones when she shares the news with them. "You have always been by my side, and now, with this, I want to give back all the love and support you have given me." Sofia and Carlos, moved and grateful, embrace Rosario warmly, knowing that her gesture is not just a material gift, but a deep expression of love and family unity. They promise to honor Rosario's legacy by sharing the fortune responsibly and generously. In a painful and unexpected moment, Rosario Salazar faces the conflict created by her own children, Martín and Camila, who decide to contest her will in court. They claim that Rosario was not of sound mind when making the provisions of her estate, casting a shadow of doubt on her intentions and mental capacity at the time of drafting the document. For Rosario, the betrayal is doubly painful, not only because of her children's refusal to accept her wishes, but also because of the insinuation that she was not in a condition to make important decisions about her own legacy. The legal process unfolds slowly, each hearing weighing heavily on Rosario's already fragile heart. She finds herself defending not only her decisions, but also her integrity and discernment. Testimonies are presented, Medical evaluations are requested, and the family divides on opposite sides of the courtroom. Meanwhile, at the nursing home, Rosario finds support among her new friends, who surround her with comfort and solidarity. Donna Ana especially becomes her confidant and emotional rock, reminding her that her decision was made with genuine love and care. "Rosario, dear, no matter what they say in that courtroom," Donna Ana says firmly, "you did what you thought was best for all of us. That's what matters." Despite the difficulties and family conflict, Rosario maintains her dignity and the certainty that her will reflects her true wishes. She clings to the hope that eventually justice will prevail and her children will understand the true meaning behind her decisions. After a long and emotional legal process, the court rules in favor of Sofia and Carlos, validating Rosario Salazar's will and ensuring that her final wishes are fulfilled as she had planned. The court recognizes the integrity of Rosario's decisions, rejecting the claims of her children, Martín and Camila, that she was not of sound mind when making her testamentary provisions. For Rosario, the verdict brings a mix of relief and sadness. She feels validated in her ability to decide on her own estate and legacy, but also mourns the division the conflict caused in her family. However, she finds comfort in the certainty that her final wishes will be respected, ensuring a secure future for Sofia, Carlos, and her grandchildren. As she leaves the courtroom, Rosario is warmly greeted by her friends from the nursing home, who embrace her with affection and relief. Donna Ana holds her hands firmly with a comforting smile. "Rosario, you showed courage and determination," says Donna Ana with evident pride in her eyes. "We are all proud of you." Rosario smiles, feeling the weight of the legal battle finally lift. She knows there is still much to face in terms of family reconciliation. But for now, she celebrates the justice that prevailed and the sense that her legacy will be preserved in the way she always wanted. Thus, Rosario Salazar continues her journey at the nursing home, with a light heart and the hope that time and love will eventually heal the wounds left by the family conflict. Did you enjoy this emotional story? Leave your comment below with your opinion and share it with your friends so that more people can be inspired. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional content like this.
This story is titled, "My Psycho Cousin Falsely Accused Me of a Sexual Assault and Family Disowned Me. Now the truth is out and my family wants me back." Alright, so this all started on a completely normal day. I'd just gotten home from work, grabbed some leftovers, and was settling in to binge a new show. My phone buzzed with a notification, and it was my cousin Megan. Now, Megan and I weren't super close. We'd talk at family events, exchange the occasional joke or comment, but that was about it. So her messaging me was already kind of odd. I opened the message and it just said, "We need to talk." No context, no follow-up. Just those 4 words. My stomach tightened because, let's be honest, "we need to talk" is never a good sign. I messaged back something like, "Sure, what's up?" She replied almost immediately, "Call me." At this point, I was starting to feel weird about the whole thing. I dialed her number, and she picked up after the first ring. The first thing she said was, "I know what you did." I sat there blinking at the wall. "What?" I finally said. "I know what you did to me at the party," she said, her voice shaky but cold. Now I'm thinking, what party? What the hell is she even talking about? "Megan, I don't know what you mean. Can you explain?" She let out this sharp breath like she was trying to keep it together. "Don't play dumb. At the barbecue last month, you assaulted me." I swear. It felt like the ground dropped out from under me. "What? Megan, no, I didn't." "What are you saying?" I stammered. "You know exactly what I'm saying," she snapped. "I remember everything. You cornered me near the garage when everyone else was inside. I didn't say anything before because I was scared, but I'm not staying quiet anymore." I was so stunned I couldn't even respond at first. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what she was accusing me of. I barely even spoke to her at the barbecue. I'd spent most of the day grilling with my brother Jake and chatting with my uncle. I hadn't gone anywhere near the garage, let alone cornered anyone. "Megan, I didn't do anything to you," I said. trying to stay calm even though my voice was shaking. I don't know where this is coming from, but it's not true. You're lying, she said, her voice breaking. I remember it. I remember everything. No, Megan, you're wrong, I insisted. I didn't do anything to you. Please, just think about this for a second. But she wasn't listening. She kept talking over me, saying how she knew it was me, how she'd been trying to process it, but couldn't stay silent anymore. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. I kept denying it, but it was like shouting into the wind. She wasn't hearing me, and I wasn't getting through to her. Finally, she said, I'm telling the family. They deserve to know what kind of person you are. And then she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking, and my head was spinning. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, trying to figure out where this was coming from. Why would she say something like that? What could have made her think I'd done something so horrible? I spent the rest of the night pacing around my apartment, completely freaking out. My first instinct was to call my parents and tell them what had just happened, but I stopped myself. What if Megan had already told them? What if they believed her? The thought made me sick to my stomach. The thing is, Megan sounded so convinced, like she genuinely believed I'd done something to her. That's what scared me the most. It wasn't just a random accusation. It was coming from someone who seemed certain they were right. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept checking my phone, half expecting it to blow up with calls or messages from family members demanding answers. But nothing happened. It was almost worse. The silence. I felt like I was sitting on a ticking time bomb, waiting for it to explode. The next day, I went to work, but I couldn't focus. My boss asked me if I was feeling okay because I looked distracted, but I just shrugged it off. I didn't want to tell anyone about what was going on. Not yet. How do you even begin to explain something like that? When I got home, I finally checked the family group chat, and there it was. A long, emotional message from Megan saying she needed to speak her truth and that she couldn't stay silent anymore. She didn't name me directly, but the way she worded it, it was obvious who she was talking about. My heart sank. This was worse than I thought. It wasn't just between me and Megan anymore. She'd made it public, and now everyone in the family was going to have their opinions about what happened, whether I said anything or not. I felt trapped. No matter how much I denied it, there'd always be that doubt hanging over me. I wanted to believe it would all blow over, that the truth would come out eventually, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The fallout hit faster than I expected. After Megan's message in the family group chat, everything changed. At first, no one reached out directly to me, which made the silence feel even worse. It was like I'd been exiled without a trial. A few days later, my phone finally rang. It was my mom. I almost didn't answer because I wasn't ready for what I knew was coming. But ignoring it wouldn't help, so I picked up. Michael, she started, her voice unusually stiff. Megan told us what happened. My stomach churned. Mom, nothing happened, I said firmly. She's lying, or she's confused. I didn't touch her. I would never do something like that. She hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. Why would she lie about something like this? She asked, and I could hear the doubt in her tone. I don't know, I shot back, frustration creeping into my voice. But I'm telling you the truth. I didn't do it. We don't know what to think, she said, her voice breaking a little. Megan's upset, and it's serious. Exactly, I said. It's serious. That's why you need to believe me. You know me, Mom. I'm your son. Why would I ever do something like this? She didn't answer. Instead, she mumbled something about needing time to process everything and hung up. I sat there holding my phone, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. If my own mother couldn't believe me, what chance did I have with the rest of the family? The silence from everyone else didn't last long. The next day, my aunt, Megan's mom, called, except she wasn't there to hear my side. You disgusting piece of garbage, she hissed as soon as I answered. I can't believe I ever let you near my daughter. Aunt Lisa, I didn't. Don't you dare try to deny it. She cut me off. Megan remembers everything, and I believe her. You're a predator, Michael. Don't think you're going to weasel your way out of this. She hung up before I could get another word in. I sat there stunned, trying to process the sheer hatred in her voice. This was my family. People I'd grown up with. People I'd trusted. And now they were treating me like a criminal. I thought maybe my brother Jake would be different. We were close. He had to know I wasn't capable of something like this. So I called him, hoping he'd have my back. When he answered, he sounded uncomfortable. Hey man, he said. What's going on? You tell me, I replied. Megan's out here accusing me of assault, and no one seems to care whether it's true or not. He sighed. Look, it's complicated. Megan's saying one thing, you're saying another. I don't know what to believe. You don't know what to believe, I snapped. Jake, you were with me at the barbecue most of the time. You know I didn't do anything. Yeah, but I wasn't with you the whole time, he said hesitantly. And Megan seemed pretty shaken up when she told everyone. Why would she make something like this up? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you're just going to sit there and let her destroy my life? I asked. I'm not taking sides, he said, which felt like the biggest betrayal of all. I hung up on him. If Jake couldn't even stand up for me, what was the point? Over the next week, things only got worse. My phone blew up with messages and calls, most of them hostile. My uncle, who used to invite me over to watch football every Sunday, sent me a text saying, "You're not welcome in my house anymore." Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly chiming in, calling me every name in the book. The worst part was the people who stayed silent. My parents didn't reach out again, and neither did Jake. It felt like everyone had already decided I was guilty. I'd walk into work every day feeling like I had a target on my back, even though no one there knew what was happening. My boss asked if I was okay because I looked distracted, but what was I supposed to say? At one point, I thought about reaching out to Megan directly. Maybe if I could just talk to her, I could figure out why she was doing this. But every time I picked up my phone, I hesitated. What would I even say? She'd already made up her mind, and so had everyone else. By the end of the month, I stopped trying to defend myself. It was exhausting, fighting a battle where no one was even listening. I pulled away from everyone. Family gatherings, group chats, even phone calls. If they didn't want me around, fine. I wouldn't force it. But the isolation was brutal. These were people I'd grown up with, people I thought I could count on. Now, it felt like I didn't have anyone in my corner. I kept telling myself it wasn't my fault, but that didn't make it hurt any less. At night, I'd lie in bed replaying conversations over and over in my head. I couldn't stop wondering, how did it come to this? How did one accusation destroy everything? After cutting myself off from my family, I thought things might get easier. I mean, how much worse could it get when I was already the black sheep in everyone's eyes? But the truth is, the silence was almost harder to deal with than the accusations. No calls, no texts, just this emptiness where my family used to be. At first, I kept holding on to this small hope that someone would reach out and say, "We believe you," or "We made a mistake," but no one did. It became clear that if I wanted to get past this, I'd have to figure out how to do it on my own. So, I focused on work. I took on more hours, volunteered for extra projects, anything to keep my mind occupied. It worked during the day, but nights were harder. I'd sit on the couch, scrolling through my phone, and catch myself opening the family group chat, even though I knew nothing good would come from it. It was like picking at a scab. You know it's going to hurt, but you can't help yourself. And of course, they were still chatting away like nothing happened. They'd share pictures from dinners and outings, everyone smiling and having a great time. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need them, but seeing those photos stung more than I wanted to admit. Amy, my girlfriend, was the only person keeping me sane during all this. She never once doubted me, not even for a second. One night, after I spent an hour ranting about how unfair everything was, she sat me down and said, "You can't keep letting this control your life. They've already taken enough from you. Don't give them any more." She was right, of course, but knowing something and doing it are two very different things. I decided to make some changes, starting with my routine. I joined a gym, not because I wanted to get ripped or anything, but because I needed a way to burn off all the frustration I was carrying around. Punching a bag felt a lot better than stewing in my anger, and after a while it even started to clear my head a bit. I also reconnected with some old friends I hadn't seen in years. At first it felt weird reaching out after so much time, but they didn't seem to care. One of them, Ryan, invited me out for a drink, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed. Like, really laughed. It was a reminder that not everyone in my life saw me as the villain. Still, moving on wasn't as easy as I'd hoped. The accusations were always in the back of my mind, like this weight I couldn't shake. I'd replay conversations with Megan, my parents, Jake, and wonder if there was something I could have said or done differently. It was exhausting, and no amount of gym sessions or hangouts with friends could completely erase it. One night, I was scrolling through Instagram when I came across a post from Megan. It was a picture of her, with a few other family members at some dinner. My parents were there. Jake was there. Even my aunt and uncle. Everyone was smiling, laughing, looking like they didn't have a care in the world. I sat there staring at the picture, and for the first time I didn't feel sad, I felt angry. Angry that they were all fine while I was left picking up the pieces. Angry that Megan, the person who started all this, was still being celebrated while I was stuck on the outside. That anger was a wake-up call. I realized that as much as I wanted to move on, I was still letting them control me. Every time I looked at that group chat or scrolled through social media, I was giving them power over my life. So, I decided to stop. I muted the group chat, unfollowed a bunch of family members on social media, and focused on building a life that didn't include them. It wasn't easy. I mean, how do you just turn off years of love and loyalty? But I had to try. Amy and I started making plans for the future, talking about moving to a new city where we could really start fresh. I didn't know if we'd actually go through with it, but just having that conversation felt like progress. I also started journaling, which sounds cheesy, but it helped. Writing down everything I was feeling gave me a way to process it without letting it eat me alive. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. Moving on wasn't a straight path. Some days I'd feel like I was making progress, and other days I'd feel like I was right back at square one. But I kept reminding myself of what Amy said. They've already taken enough. I wasn't going to let them take any more. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could finally leave this whole mess behind me. It had been months since I cut ties with most of my family, and I was starting to feel like I was finally finding my footing again. Life wasn't perfect, but it was steady. Then, one random Tuesday afternoon, I got a notification on my phone, a message request on Facebook. I almost ignored it, assuming it was spam, but when I glanced at the name, my heart skipped a beat. It was Megan. My hands froze for a second. I wasn't sure if I wanted to open it. Part of me thought it was just going to be more nonsense, maybe some guilt tripping or a half-baked attempt to spin the story further. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The message was short. Way too short, considering everything that had happened. I need to apologize. I made a mistake, and I'm sorry for everything I put you through. I read it a few times, making sure I wasn't misunderstanding. My first reaction wasn't relief or even happiness. It was anger. That was it? After all the damage she caused, after turning my family against me, this was what she had to say? I didn't reply right away. I showed the message to Amy that night, and her reaction mirrored mine. She thinks a few words can make up for what she did, she said, crossing her arms. She didn't even explain herself. What kind of apology is that? She wasn't wrong. Still, I needed to know more. After sitting on it for a couple of days, I finally responded, "Why now? What changed?" Megan replied almost instantly, "I've been thinking about everything, and I realized I was wrong. I thought it was you because I couldn't remember much from that night, but I've been working through some things, and I realized I made a mistake. I'm sorry for blaming you." Reading that made my blood boil. She thought it was me? That was her excuse for accusing me of something so serious, something that completely wrecked my relationship with my family? I wanted to scream at her, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me, but I held back. Instead, I replied, "Do you even understand what you've done? I lost my family because of your accusation. People who were supposed to trust me turned their backs on me. You saying sorry doesn't erase all of that." She read it but didn't reply right away. Hours passed, and when she finally did respond, her message was weak. "I know I messed up. I didn't think it would get this bad. I really am sorry." That was it. No real accountability, no acknowledgement of the depth of the damage she'd done. Just a shallow, "I didn't think it would get this bad." I showed her response to Amy, who rolled her eyes so hard I thought they'd get stuck. "She's not sorry for what she did," she said. "She's sorry for how it made her look." She was right. Megan's apology wasn't about making amends. It was about clearing her conscience. She wanted to move on without facing the mess she'd left behind. I decided I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. My last message to her was blunt. "I appreciate you admitting you were wrong, but this isn't something I can just forgive and forget. You've caused so much harm, and I'm the one who's been paying for it. I need time to figure out what I want to do with this." She didn't reply, just left me on read. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. Megan had never been the type to stick around when things got uncomfortable. The apology didn't feel like a victory. If anything, it left me more frustrated. Sure, the truth was out now, but what did that change? My family still doubted me for months, still treated me like I was guilty without even hearing me out. Megan's apology didn't erase the pain or repair the relationships I'd lost, but it was something. A small crack in the wall that had been built around me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Update 1. After Megan's apology, word started to spread through the family. I didn't announce it or anything. Someone else must have shared it. Maybe Megan told my parents, or maybe it came up in one of their group chats that I was no longer a part of. Either way, it wasn't long before the calls and messages started rolling in. The first one came from my mom. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. "Hey, Michael," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I heard what Megan told you. I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry. We're sorry. We should have believed you." Hearing her say that didn't bring the relief I thought it would. Instead, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and maybe a little hope. "Why didn't you?" I asked, my tone harsher than I intended. She hesitated, which told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know," she finally said. "Megan seemed so certain, and we didn't think she'd make something like that up." "You didn't even give me the chance to explain," I shot back. "You just assumed the worst." "We messed up," she admitted. "I don't expect you to forgive us right away, but we want to make things right." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just told her I needed time to think about it and ended the call. The next one came from Jake. I wasn't as generous with him. I ignored the first two calls before finally picking up the third. "Hey," he said, sounding nervous. "Look, I know I messed up. I should have backed you up. I didn't know what to do." "You knew I didn't do it, Jake," I said, my voice steady but cold. "You were with me for most of that party. How could you just stand by and let this happen?" "I was scared, okay?" he blurted out. "I didn't want to get involved and make things worse. I thought if I stayed out of it, it would blow over." I laughed bitterly. "Well, it didn't blow over, did it? It blew up my whole life." He apologized again, over and over, but I didn't let him off the hook easily. He'd been my brother, someone I thought I could count on, and he chose to stay silent when I needed him most. I told him I'd think about whether I even wanted to rebuild our relationship, and he seemed to understand. The hardest call came from my dad. We'd barely spoken since the accusation, and the distance between us felt impossible to bridge. When he called, he got straight to the point. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yeah, you do," I replied, not bothering to sugarcoat it. "I don't know why I doubted you," he admitted. "I guess I was scared that Megan might be telling the truth. I didn't want to believe it, but I didn't know what to think." "Do you even realize how much you hurt me?" I asked. "You're my dad. You were supposed to have my back, and you didn't." "I know," he said quietly, "and I'll never forgive myself for that." It wasn't the perfect apology, but it felt more genuine than the others. I told him I wasn't sure if I could move past what happened, but I appreciated him owning up to it. Rebuilding those relationships has been slow. Some family members didn't even bother to apologize. They just acted like nothing had happened and expected me to do the same. I didn't. If they weren't willing to acknowledge the harm they'd caused, I wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine. Amy has been my rock through all of this. She keeps reminding me to set boundaries and not let guilt push me into forgiving people who don't deserve it. "It's okay to take your time," she told me one night. "You don't owe them anything." She's right. As much as I want to fix things, I know I can't rush it. Some relationships may never go back to the way they were, and that's okay. Megan never reached out again after her apology. And honestly, I prefer it that way. Her message didn't feel like a step toward fixing things. It felt like a way for her to clear her conscience. I've accepted that I may never fully forgive her, but at least I have the truth now. Slowly, I've started letting a few family members back into my life. I've been cautious, testing the waters with small conversations and meetups. Some are genuinely trying to make amends, and I appreciate that. Others, well, let's just say they've shown me who they really are. Update 2. Hey everyone, I wanted to give an update because, well, things have taken a turn, and let's just say karma finally came knocking on Megan's door. After months of silence following her weak apology, I wasn't really keeping tabs on her. I unfollowed her on social media and was doing my best to move on with my life. But, as it turns out, I didn't need to keep tabs. Word found its way to me anyway, courtesy of the family grapevine. Apparently, Megan's life has been falling apart lately, and honestly, I'm not even surprised. It started with her losing her job. From what I heard, she was let go for some conduct issues. The details are murky, but my cousin Ryan, who I've reconnected with, by the way, told me it had something to do with her spreading rumors about a coworker. Sound familiar? Not long after that, Megan had a huge falling out with her mom, Aunt Lisa. Lisa, who had been Megan's biggest supporter during her accusations against me, finally hit her breaking point. Megan was living with her rent-free after her job loss, and apparently she wasn't doing much to help out around the house. From what I've been told, there was a massive blow-up where Lisa accused Megan of being ungrateful and selfish, and Megan accused Lisa of always taking things too far. Here's the kicker. Lisa kicked Megan out. Yep, the same aunt who called me a disgusting piece of garbage is now refusing to let her own daughter stay in her house. Irony, huh? It doesn't end there. Megan's personal life has also been a mess. She recently broke up with her boyfriend after he found out she'd been lying to him about, well, pretty much everything. I don't know all the details, but from what I heard, she'd been telling him she was working on exciting career opportunities, while actually unemployed and borrowing money from family members to keep up appearances. Oh, and about those family members? They're starting to see her for who she really is. Ryan told me that a lot of the cousins who initially backed her during the accusations have distanced themselves after seeing how toxic she can be. I guess it's easier to believe someone's lies until you're on the receiving end of them. And as for my parents, they've been oddly quiet about the whole thing. My mom mentioned Megan's situation in passing during one of our recent conversations, saying, "She's going through a lot right now," but there wasn't much sympathy in her tone. I think even she's starting to realize that Megan isn't the innocent victim she claimed to be. Do I feel bad for Megan? Honestly, not really. She made her choices, and now she's dealing with the consequences. She lied about me, turned my family against me, and caused years of pain that I'm still working to move past. Karma catching up with her doesn't make me happy, but it does feel justified. The one thing I've learned through all of this is that actions have consequences. Megan might have gotten away with her lies for a while, but the truth always finds a way to come out. And when it doesn't pull any punches. For now, I'm focusing on myself and the relationships that matter. I've rebuilt some trust with my parents and Jake, though it's a slow process. Amy and I are still going strong, and we've been talking more seriously about moving to a new city for a fresh start. As for Megan, I'm keeping my distance. I've done enough cleaning up after her messes, and I'm not about to get dragged into another one. If she ever decides to really own up to what she did, not just to me, but to everyone else she's hurt, maybe I'll consider having a conversation. Until then, I'll let karma do its thing. Thanks for sticking with me through this. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't need everyone's approval to live a good life. You just need the right people in your corner. Parents kicked me out on my birthday, then tried to take over my new home, but I had the last word. So, my 18th birthday. It should have been a big deal, right? Like a milestone or whatever. I was expecting at least a small family dinner, maybe some cake. Just a chance to relax, you know? But nah, things went the opposite way, and it still feels unreal. I had zero clue what was about to happen when I woke up that morning. I remember walking into the kitchen, the smell of coffee hitting me like every other day. My dad was sitting at the table with this serious look on his face. But it wasn't the "you messed up" kind of serious, more like he was getting ready to deliver some big news. My mom was standing near the sink, her back to me, pretending to wash dishes, but I could tell she was just avoiding eye contact. I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" trying to read the room. And then my dad just says, "Steve, you're 18 now. Time to be on your own." That was it. Flat and cold, like he was telling me the weather. I just stood there, kind of shocked, waiting for him to laugh or something, like it was a joke. But no, he was dead serious. I asked, "Wait, what do you mean?" And he goes, "You're an adult. It's time for you to leave and figure things out." I looked over at my mom, hoping she'd say something, anything, but she just kept her back turned, scrubbing the same plate over and over. At that moment, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I mean, I get it, people move out at 18, but this was like a total surprise. No heads up, no discussion about plans or saving money, nothing. And it wasn't like we were struggling financially. They could easily afford to keep me there while I figured out my next steps. But nope, I was expected to pack up and get out right then and there. So I asked, "Where am I supposed to go?" And my dad just shrugs like it wasn't his problem anymore. "Figure it out, Steve. You're an adult." My head was spinning. It felt like one of those moments where everything's moving in slow motion and you're just stuck. Trying to process it all, I didn't even know where to start. I was like, "Wait, am I in trouble? Did I do something?" And he just repeated, "It's time to grow up." It's funny because up until that point, I thought I had a pretty okay relationship with them. Sure, we had our arguments, but nothing that seemed like a get out and don't come back kind of thing. So I started asking, is this about me not going to college right away? I told you I needed time to figure things out. But my dad just waved me off, saying, "You've been freeloading for long enough. It's time to go." I felt my face get hot, that kind of anger that makes your hands shake, but there was nothing I could say to change his mind. I stood there for what felt like forever, hoping my mom would jump in. But she stayed silent, acting like I wasn't even there. That hurt more than anything my dad said. It was like she had already checked out of caring about me. Finally, I just gave up arguing. What was the point? I went to my room, grabbed the biggest duffel bag I could find, and started shoving my stuff in. Clothes, some books, my laptop, anything I thought I'd need. It was all happening so fast, and I felt this tightness in my chest, like I couldn't breathe. The walls of my room felt like they were closing in, like this place I'd called home for so long was suddenly suffocating me. I remember looking around my room, at all the posters and random stuff I'd collected over the years. It was like watching my childhood get packed away in minutes. The room felt empty and cold when I was done, and it hit me that this was it. I wasn't going to be coming back. When I came back out with my duffel bag, my dad didn't even look up from his coffee. My mom finally turned around, but she just looked past me, like I was some stranger passing through. I tried one last time. Are you really just going to kick me out like this? She finally spoke, but her voice was so cold. It's for your own good, Steve. I didn't know what to say. It felt like everything was happening to someone else, like I was watching my life from the outside. I walked out of the house, my bag slung over my shoulder, feeling the weight of every step. I stood on the driveway for a minute, just staring at the house, hoping maybe they'd change their minds, but the door stayed closed. They didn't even bother to come out and say goodbye. As I walked down the street, I felt lost. I didn't have a plan, no idea where I was going to go. I started calling friends one by one, hoping someone would let me crash for the night. A couple of them were cool with it at first, but you could tell they were hesitating, like they didn't want to get too involved. I guess I can't blame them. Who wants a couch surfer showing up with no end date in sight? I ended up at my buddy Mark's place. He and his roommate were chill enough to let me crash for a few days. I remember lying on his couch that first night, staring up at the ceiling, feeling this weird mix of anger and confusion. Like, how did it go from a regular morning to being homeless in a matter of hours? It's crazy because I kept thinking it was some kind of mistake or test, like they were waiting for me to figure something out and come back. But the more time passed, the more I realized they were serious. They didn't want me there. It was like this punch in the gut, realizing your own family doesn't have your back. The first few nights weren't too bad. Mark and his roommate were cool, and we'd stay up late, playing video games and joking around. But after a while, I could tell they were getting tired of having me there. And honestly, I was starting to feel like a burden too. There's only so many times you can hear, "Hey man, any luck with finding a place?" before it starts to sting. So, after about a week, I packed up my stuff and moved on to another friend's place. After a few weeks of bouncing from couch to couch, it started becoming clear that I was running out of places to go. Friends that I thought would have my back started making excuses like, "Hey man, my roommate's getting annoyed," or "My girlfriend's coming over a lot and it's getting crowded." It wasn't like they were being jerks or anything, I get it. No one signs up for a long-term couch guest, and the longer I stayed, the more I could see it in their eyes. They were itching for me to move on, even if they didn't say it directly. But once the couches dried up, that's when things got real. I didn't have enough money for a motel, and sleeping in my car became the new normal. I tried to make the best of it. I set up my back seat like a cramped little bed, threw in some blankets and a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, but it was all I had. I parked in quiet spots, like behind gyms or in the corners of supermarket parking lots, hoping to avoid getting noticed. You never realize how loud parking lots are until you're trying to sleep in one. People coming and going, headlights flashing through the windows. Every noise had me on edge. The first few nights, I barely slept. My body would ache from being crammed in such a small space, and every noise outside made me jump. I'd wake up to security guards knocking on my window, telling me to move along. It's humiliating when you have to pack up and drive off, pretending like it's no big deal when really, you're just trying to find another spot to crash. I tried to make a routine out of it. I'd park at a 24-hour gym, using my membership to sneak in for showers and bathrooms. It felt like my only luxury, a hot shower. It kept me feeling human when everything else was slipping away. I kept a backpack with my essentials, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, and some snacks. It was weird having my life reduced to such a small amount of stuff. During the day, I'd spend hours in my car, applying for jobs on my phone wherever I could find free Wi-Fi. It felt like I was throwing resumes into a black hole. I'd get the occasional, "We'll keep your application on file," but nothing concrete. I started applying to places I never imagined working at. Fast food chains, call centers, gas stations. At that point, I would have taken anything. One night, I thought maybe my family would have come around. It had been weeks, and I figured maybe they'd check in, see if I was okay. I decided to call my mom again. I didn't expect much, but I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd have a change of heart. When she picked up, her voice was flat, like I was a stranger. "Hey Mom, it's me, just checking in." She didn't even ask how I was doing. It was just, "What do you need, Steve?" That stung. It was like every bit of hope I had got sucked out in that moment, but I tried to keep it cool. I was wondering if there's any chance I could stay with you guys for a bit, just till I get back on my feet. She didn't hesitate. We already talked about this. We can't have you freeloading, Steve. You need to figure this out. The way she said it, so cold and detached, made my stomach drop. I felt like I was begging, and she was just shutting me down like I was some random guy asking for money on the street. I tried again, desperate. I'm not asking for much, Mom. Just a couch. I'll pay rent once I start making money. I'm just stuck right now. There was a long pause, and for a second, I thought maybe she was considering it. But when she spoke again, it was just the same. We all have our responsibilities. You're an adult now, and it's time to act like it. I hung up. I didn't even say goodbye. It was like a final slap in the face, knowing that my own mom didn't care if I was struggling. It felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. I stared at my phone, watching the screen fade to black, realizing that I was completely and totally alone in this. After that call, something shifted. I stopped reaching out to people. It felt like every time I did, it just reminded me of how alone I really was. So I kept my head down and tried to survive the best way I could. I started parking in different places every night, trying not to stick out. The last thing I needed was for someone to recognize me and start asking questions. I didn't want anyone knowing how bad things had gotten. I was spending a lot of time in public libraries during the day, using their Wi-Fi and charging my phone. I'd sit at the same spot near the back, my duffel bag at my feet, pretending like I was just another person studying or reading. But inside, I felt this constant tension, like at any moment, someone was going to look at me and know I didn't belong. There's this weird thing about being homeless. Everything feels like a fight to keep your dignity. You don't want people to know you're struggling, but at the same time, you're doing everything you can just to get by. I remember this one night, parked behind a supermarket. It was late and I was trying to fall asleep when a cop knocked on my window. I jolted awake, heart pounding. I rolled down the window trying to act like everything was normal. "What are you doing here?" he asked, shining his flashlight inside. I tried to explain, but the look on his face said it all. He didn't care about my story. "You can't stay here, man. Move along." I nodded, trying not to sound bitter. "Yeah, sorry. I'll move." As I started my car and pulled out of the lot, I felt that familiar mix of anger and shame bubbling up again. It felt like no matter where I went, I was a problem. I drove around for an hour, aimlessly, trying to find another spot. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour fast food place, and that became my new spot for the night. I watched people go through the drive-thru, laughing and talking, while I huddled in the back of my car trying to get some rest. It felt like there was this whole world moving on without me, and I was stuck on the outside, watching. Eventually, I learned how to blend in better. I'd park in different spots every night and get up early enough to move before anyone noticed. I became good at finding the quiet places, those hidden corners of lots where no one really cared. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was temporary, that any minute someone would come knocking again, telling me to move on. Every day was about finding the next spot, the next place to rest. It was this cycle of packing up, driving, unpacking, and repeating it all over again. I started feeling like I was in survival mode all the time, like I couldn't let my guard down, not even for a second. There were days when I'd sit in my car, staring at my phone, wondering if I should call anyone, my family, friends, even my brother. But I knew how those calls would go. I knew they'd either laugh or tell me to man up. So I just stopped trying. It felt like every time I reached out, I was proving them right, proving that I was the screw-up they thought I was. But through all of it, I kept applying for jobs, kept trying to find a way out. I didn't want to stay stuck in that car forever. I was determined to find something, even if it was just a tiny chance to pull myself out of the mess I was in. But man, it was a lonely fight. Living out of my car wasn't easy, but after a while, I got into a rhythm. I figured out where to park, what time to move, and how to stay invisible. It was all about survival, just keeping my head down and pushing through. But man, even with all that, there were days where I felt like I was just going in circles. I spent a lot of my days at a 24-hour gym. I had this cheap membership that let me shower and keep myself somewhat clean. It was one of the only places where I didn't feel completely out of place. I'd go there, clean up, and then sit in my car, applying for any job I could find. It was like a full-time hustle, and it felt like for every 10 applications I sent out, maybe one would get a response. And those responses were usually the same. "We appreciate your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates." I was starting to feel like maybe this was it, that I'd just be stuck like this. But then, one day, I finally caught a break. A retail store called me for an interview. I remember getting that call and feeling this mix of hope and nerves. It wasn't a dream job by any means, but at that point, anything was better than nothing. I showed up to the interview wearing the best clothes I had, which was basically the cleanest shirt from my car and some jeans that were starting to fray at the ends. I walked in, trying to act like I had everything together, but inside, I was a mess. I was thinking, please, just give me a chance. The manager, this guy named Tony, seemed chill enough. We talked for a bit, and he asked the usual questions: availability, experience, stuff like that. I tried to stay confident, like I had it all figured out, but I could tell he saw through it a bit. Then he asked, do you have reliable transportation? I hesitated for a second, thinking about how I basically lived in my car, but I just nodded. Yeah, I've got a car. I left out the part where it was my makeshift home. Tony stared at me for a moment like he was sizing me up. Then he said, all right, you're hired. It's minimum wage and you'll start next week. Man, I can't even describe the relief I felt. It wasn't much, but it was something. It felt like I finally had a shot to get out of the mess I was in. That night, for the first time in a while, I actually felt hopeful. I parked my car in my usual spot, and instead of feeling defeated, I was thinking about how I was going to make this work. The first few weeks at the retail job were rough. It was long hours, mostly on my feet, dealing with customers and stocking shelves. But I didn't mind. I threw myself into it, working every shift they offered. I'd show up early, stay late, and basically just try to make myself useful. Tony noticed. He'd give me a nod every now and then, and sometimes he'd tell me, good job, Steve. It wasn't much, but it felt like someone actually saw the effort I was putting in. With the job came paychecks, and with paychecks came a bit of stability. I wasn't rolling in cash or anything, but I could finally afford to buy food without having to count every dollar. I started saving whatever I could, even if it was just a few bucks at a time. My car still doubled as my bed, but at least I didn't have to worry about starving. I'd make little meals from whatever I could get cheap at the store. Bread, canned stuff, nothing fancy, but it worked. After a couple of months, I was even able to scrape together enough to split a cheap condo with a guy named Mike. He was looking for a roommate, and honestly, I was just grateful for a place with 4 walls and a roof. We weren't best friends or anything, but he was chill enough. We agreed to split the rent and utilities right down the middle, and that was that. Moving into that condo felt like a victory. For the first time in months, I had a bed, a real one, and a kitchen to cook in. I remember the first night I stayed there, just lying on that bed, staring up at the ceiling, feeling like I'd finally caught a break. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it felt like I was finally clawing my way out of the hole I'd been stuck in for so long. But life has a way of knocking you down just when you start to feel steady. A few months in, the pandemic hit, and everything went sideways. The store I worked at shut down temporarily, and like dominoes, my little setup started falling apart. At first, I thought it'd be a short-term thing, like we'd close for a couple of weeks and then get back to normal. But it didn't take long before it was clear that wasn't going to happen. I got the call one afternoon. Tony was on the other end, and his voice was strained. Hey, Steve, I'm sorry, but we've got to let you go. We're not sure when we'll reopen. I tried to stay calm, but inside, I felt everything crumbling again. I thanked him for the opportunity, but the minute I hung up, I just sat there, staring at my phone, wondering what the hell I was going to do now. My roommate Mike was in the same boat. He lost his job too, and without either of us making money, the rent became impossible to keep up with. We stretched it as far as we could, pooling whatever savings we had, but eventually it wasn't enough. We had to break the lease, and just like that, I was back to square one. Packing my stuff into my car again felt like some cruel joke. It was like life was taunting me, saying, nice try, but not quite. I didn't have many options left, so I rigged up the back of my car with some old blankets, turning it into a camper setup. It wasn't great, but at least it was mine. I drove around looking for a spot where I could stay without getting hassled and found this old lot behind a strip mall. It was quiet enough, and no one seemed to care that I was there. I sat in my makeshift camper, looking out the window at the empty lot, and felt this wave of frustration. It felt like every step forward came with 2 steps back. But I tried to remind myself that I'd been here before, and I'd gotten through it. I knew how to hustle, how to survive. I just had to do it all over again. There were nights where I'd lay there staring at the ceiling of my car, feeling the weight of it all. It's hard to stay hopeful when everything feels temporary, like you're one step away from losing it all again. But at the same time, I knew I had no choice but to keep pushing forward. I'd done it once, and I'd have to do it again. The days started to blur together. I'd wake up early, head to the gym for a shower, and then spend hours looking for work online. I applied for everything: warehouses, grocery stores, delivery gigs, anything that would get me back on my feet. The stress was constant, but I kept telling myself, you just need one chance, one job to get things moving again. Some nights, I'd pull up to the same fast food place and park in the corner of the lot, watching the cars go through the drive-thru, headlights cutting through the darkness. It felt like the world was still moving while I was stuck in place, waiting for something to give. But as rough as it was, I refused to let myself give up. I'd made it through before, and somehow, I was gonna do it again. Living in my car again felt like hitting the reset button, but this time with an even bigger challenge. I had been through this once already, so I knew the drill, but there was this constant weight on my shoulders. It's like, yeah, I knew what to do, but man, it felt 10 times harder to get back up when everything was closing down around me. Everywhere I looked, businesses were shutting their doors, and the job market was tighter than ever. I kept applying for anything I could find, but it was getting bleak. Weeks went by, and every day felt the same. Sending out resumes, checking my phone, and seeing nothing but rejections or worse, no replies at all. I started to wonder if I was ever going to catch a break again. I knew I couldn't stay stuck like this, but without an income, it felt like I was trapped in a loop. But then, one morning, I got a call. It was from this warehouse I'd applied to weeks ago. Honestly, I'd almost forgotten about it because I sent out so many applications. The guy on the phone sounded straightforward. Steve, we've got an opening. It's long hours, but if you're available, you can start next Monday. I remember sitting there in my car, gripping the phone, trying not to sound too desperate as I agreed. I could barely believe it. Finally, a break. The warehouse was about 30 minutes away from where I'd been parking my car, and I was ready to do whatever it took to make it work. The day before my shift, I drove over there to check out the area, and I parked my car in a lot nearby, figuring I'd sleep there for the night. It wasn't the best spot, but I wanted to be close enough to make sure I got there on time. When I showed up for the first shift, I was nervous. It was one of those massive warehouses with rows and rows of boxes, pallets stacked high. I walked in, and it was loud, forklifts buzzing around, people shouting instructions. I felt a bit out of place at first, but I told myself to just focus on getting through the day. My boss, Mr. Thompson, was this older guy, gruff but fair. He gave me the rundown, showing me what needed to be done, moving boxes, sorting inventory, loading trucks. It was physically demanding, but that didn't bother me. I was just grateful to be working again. I pushed myself hard that first day, lifting everything I could, moving as fast as possible, just trying to show that I wasn't some lazy guy off the street. After my shift, I went up to Mr. Thompson, and I figured I'd ask a favor. Hey, I know this is kind of a weird request, but is it okay if I park my car in the lot here, just until I get things figured out? I expected him to say no, but he paused, studying me for a second. You planning on sticking around, Steve? He asked, and I nodded. Absolutely. I'm here to work. He scratched his head for a moment, then nodded back. All right, just make sure you're not in anyone's way, and you can hook up to the outlet over there if you need power. I felt this wave of relief. It might have been a small thing for him, but for me, it was huge. Being able to park without worrying about getting kicked out was like a weight lifting off my chest. That night, I pulled my car into a corner of the lot and plugged in, setting up my little camper space. Having lights and a bit of heat felt like a luxury. For the first time in a while, I didn't have to worry about someone banging on my window, telling me to move. I lay down in the back of my car, staring up at the roof, feeling a bit of hope creeping back in. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small step forward. The next few weeks were a grind. The warehouse job was tough, long shifts, heavy lifting, and sometimes we'd be there until late at night. But I showed up early every day, making sure I was ready for anything they needed. Mr. Thompson noticed. He'd nod at me, sometimes giving me a thumbs up when I finished a task. It wasn't like we were buddies or anything, but I could tell he respected hard work. I started saving again. This time I was smarter about it. Every paycheck, I'd set aside as much as I could. I cut back on everything, eating the cheapest stuff I could find, skipping meals when I had to. It was all about building up a safety net so I wouldn't have to live in my car forever. I knew it wasn't going to be an overnight thing, but I kept my head down and focused. One day, after a long shift, Mr. Thompson pulled me aside. I thought maybe I'd messed something up, but instead he said, "You've been putting in the effort, Steve. We've got an opening for a night supervisor. You interested?" My heart was pounding. A supervisor role? That meant more money, more stability. I nodded so fast I probably looked desperate, but I didn't care. "Yes, absolutely," I said. The promotion was a game changer. It wasn't a huge raise, but it was enough that I could start thinking about the future. I started looking online for cheap apartments or even small manufactured homes. It felt good to have options again, to feel like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. As the weeks went by, I got better at the job. I learned how to manage shipments, oversee other workers, and make sure everything ran smoothly. It felt good to have responsibility, like I was proving to myself that I could handle more. And the best part? I was getting closer to my goal. Every dollar saved was one step closer to getting out of my car for good. I remember this one night, after a long shift. I was sitting in my car looking up places online, and I found this manufactured home that was within my budget. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and it was in a quiet park, not too far from the warehouse. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. It felt like I was finally getting a glimpse of a life that wasn't just about scraping by. I saved the listing and told myself, just a few more months of grinding and this could be yours. It was the first time in ages that I felt like I was actually building something, not just surviving day to day. I lay back in my car that night, feeling this mix of exhaustion and excitement. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The days blurred into weeks, and I kept my routine. Early mornings, late nights, working as hard as I could. Mr. Thompson kept giving me more responsibilities, and with every shift, I felt a bit more secure. It was like, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting to everything falling apart. I was actually in control, and it felt good. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Living out of my car was still rough. There were nights when the cold crept in, and no amount of blankets could keep me warm enough. But I held on to the thought of that manufactured home, of finally having a place that was mine, where I wouldn't have to worry about being kicked out or moving on. That hope was enough to keep me going. So that's where I was, working, saving, and slowly, bit by bit, building something for myself. It wasn't easy, but I knew I was on the right track. After months of grinding and saving, things were finally looking up. I had saved enough to seriously consider getting that manufactured home I'd been eyeing. I remember driving past it a few times just to get a feel for the neighborhood. It was a quiet spot, surrounded by trees and tucked away from the main road. Felt like the kind of place where I could actually breathe for once. It was far from fancy, but to me, it was perfect. One afternoon, I called the real estate agent listed on the sign. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. I kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if they ran a credit check and saw my terrible history? What if someone else already put an offer down? But I pushed those thoughts aside and waited as the phone rang. The agent was this cheerful guy named Pete. He asked a few basic questions, and I tried my best to sound confident, like I wasn't living out of my car and just barely making it. We set up a time for me to come check out the place. When I hung up, I felt this weird mix of nerves and excitement. This could be my shot at turning things around for good, but it also felt like everything was riding on it. The day of the viewing, I pulled up to the home early, parked my car around the corner, and tried to make myself look presentable. I had one decent button-up shirt left, and I hoped it would be enough. Pete was already there when I walked up, a big smile on his face. He shook my hand and started showing me around. Inside, it was simple: a small kitchen, a living room, and 3 bedrooms. The walls were plain, and the floors were a bit scuffed up, but it felt right. I could already picture myself fixing it up, making it mine. Pete talked about how it was a good starter home, how the previous owner had kept it in decent shape, and how it was a great opportunity for someone looking to build a future. I nodded along, trying not to let on how badly I wanted this to work. After the tour, he asked if I was interested in putting down an offer. I told him I was, and we sat down at the tiny kitchen table to go through the paperwork. My hands were still a bit shaky, but I tried to keep my voice steady as I filled everything out. We talked numbers, and when he mentioned the down payment, I felt a bit of relief. I had saved enough, but just barely. The next few days were tense. Pete said it would take some time for the paperwork to go through, and he'd have to check everything out on his end. I spent those days at work, trying to focus, but my mind was always drifting back to that house. I kept thinking, this could be it. This could finally be my home. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race, hoping it was Pete with good news. One afternoon, while I was on my break at the warehouse, I finally got the call. Pete's voice was bright, and he said, "Steve, congratulations. The place is yours." I just stood there, holding my phone, not really believing it. I thanked him a bunch of times, and when I hung up, I felt this wave of relief wash over me. I did it. I actually did it. I drove over to the house later that day and just stood outside looking at it. It wasn't much, but it was mine. All the nights spent in my car, all the rough patches, felt like they had finally led to something. I had a place where I didn't have to worry about getting kicked out or moving every night. It was a real home. Moving in was another challenge, but this time it was the kind of challenge I wanted. I had to clean up the place, get some basic furniture, and make it livable. I started with the essentials: a mattress, a small table, and a couple of chairs. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough to get started. I spent my first night in the house sleeping on that mattress, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally relax. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into fixing the place up. I patched up the scuffed floors, painted the walls, and slowly started filling the space with things I'd collected over the years. It felt like every little improvement I made was a step toward reclaiming my life. It was my way of proving to myself that I wasn't just scraping by anymore. I was building something real. But of course, life has a way of dragging you back, no matter how far you think you've come. A few weeks after moving in, I made a mistake. I posted about the new place on social media. I guess I was feeling proud and wanted to share it, even if I hadn't talked to most of my family in ages. I posted a picture of me holding the keys in front of the door, captioned it with something like, "From living in my car to owning my first home, never give up." The response was huge. Friends, old coworkers, even some people I hadn't spoken to in years were leaving comments and congratulating me. It felt good to have that support. But then, of course, the past had to show up. One afternoon, I was unpacking a box of kitchen supplies when there was a knock on my door. I thought it might be a neighbor stopping by to say hello, but when I opened it, I was met with a familiar face. Dan, my older brother, standing there with his wife and kids. "Hey, Steve, saw your post. Nice place you got here," he said, stepping inside like he owned the place. His wife and kids followed, looking around like they were scoping the place out. I was caught off guard. "Dan, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice tight. Dan gave me this casual shrug like it was no big deal. "Well, since you've got all this space now and it's just you, we were thinking maybe we could move in. You wouldn't even notice us." I stood there, my hands tightening into fists. I was furious. "No, Dan, this is my home." That's when he pulled out some papers and waved them in front of me. "Look, we even drew up rental agreements. You can stay in your camper. It's what you're used to, right?" I felt my blood boil. The audacity. I snatched the papers and scanned them. They were fake. My signature wasn't even close. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. "Get out of my house, Dan. Now." He didn't move, his expression shifting to something darker. "Come on, Steve, don't make this difficult. We're family." That's when I knew they weren't leaving on their own. I pulled out my phone and dialed the police. As I stood there, waiting for them to arrive, I felt this overwhelming sense of betrayal. My own brother, trying to take over my life again. When the cops showed up, they took one look at the papers and saw right through it. They told Dan and his family they had to leave, and they did, but not before giving me this look like I was the one in the wrong. As they drove off, I felt this mix of anger and relief. The house was mine, and no one was going to take that from me. That night, as I locked up the house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had finally taken back control of my life, and this time, I wasn't letting anyone drag me down.
My name is Kelly, and 2 years ago my life was shattered when I discovered that my husband, Scott, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The man I had trusted with my heart, the one who promised to love me forever, was having an affair with my younger sister, Lauren. The pain of their betrayal was unbearable, but the final blow came when they had the audacity to send me an invitation to their wedding. It felt like a cruel joke, a twisted reminder that they had moved on while I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken life, but the betrayal didn't stop there. When my mother told me she would attend the ceremony, it felt like a knife twisting in my already wounded heart. How could she side with them after what they had done to me? I felt utterly alone, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me the most. However, instead of wallowing in despair, I decided I would not let them get away with this. I had a plan to make them pay for what they had done. Scott and I had met at work, where I was his boss. He was new to the company, and I was responsible for his training. Despite his initial nervousness, he was sincere and eager to learn. We gradually grew closer, and one day he surprised me by asking if I was free on our next day off. It was the first time I saw him so confident outside the office, and it made my heart skip a beat. We started dating, and after 3 months, he asked me to be his girlfriend. Our relationship grew stronger as he became more skilled at his job, earning praise from his supervisors. When Scott got promoted and transferred to a different department, he proposed to me, and I happily agreed. Our wedding went smoothly, and my family, especially Lauren, welcomed him with open arms. Lauren, who was the same age as Scott, seemed particularly taken with him. She often remarked on how lucky I was to have married such a kind man, and how people at work held him in high regard. At the time, Lauren had just broken up with her boyfriend and was yearning for marriage, constantly expressing how envious she was of my happiness. As we settled into married life, I continued to support Scott, both at work and at home. I thought I was doing everything right, but about a year into our marriage, things started to change. Scott began coming home later and later, and we hardly ever had dinner together anymore. When I asked him if everything was okay at work, he brushed me off, saying nothing was wrong. But I could tell something had changed. He used to share everything with me, but now he seemed distant and irritable whenever I brought up work. Desperate to reconnect, I suggested we go to a spa together during our next holiday. Lauren had recommended a place to us, and I thought it would be a perfect way to relax and spend some quality time together. Scott seemed indifferent, but I went ahead and made the reservations anyway. A week before the trip, I reminded him, but he dropped a bombshell. He had to go on a business trip that same weekend. I was disappointed, but he insisted it couldn't be helped, so I canceled our plans. On the day he left for his business trip, I received a call from the hotel where I had booked the spa, confirming our arrival time. Confused, I realized my cancellation hadn't gone through. I decided to invite Lauren instead, thinking it would be a nice way to cheer myself up. But when I called, my parents said Lauren had been out since the morning. As a last resort, I invited my mother, who surprisingly agreed. It seemed she had noticed I had been down lately and wanted to support me. We arrived at the hotel, ready to enjoy our spa day, but what we witnessed instead was something I could never have imagined. There, walking arm in arm, were Scott and Lauren, entering the very hotel where we were supposed to stay. My heart stopped as I realized the woman my husband was with was none other than my sister. They looked so happy together, completely oblivious to the fact that they had been caught. I was in a state of shock as we drove back home. My mother tried to comfort me, but nothing could dull the pain of such a deep betrayal. Scott had been lying to me all along, and so had Lauren. They had been sneaking around behind my back, using his so-called business trips as a cover for their affair. The realization made my anger burn hotter than the sadness. The moment Scott returned from his trip, I was ready. I had already signed a new lease for an apartment and prepared the divorce papers. I left the papers and a letter for Scott, outlining the terms and letting him know that all further communication would be handled through my lawyer. I blocked his number and moved out before he even knew what hit him. I also made sure to keep my new address a secret, not even telling my parents at work. Scott and I still saw each other occasionally, but I ignored him completely. It didn't take long for him to agree to the divorce, understanding that he had no leg to stand on. Our colleagues seemed to sense what had happened, though no one spoke about it openly. The whispers and sideways glances were enough to let Scott know that his reputation had been tarnished. 5 years passed, and I kept my distance from both Scott and my family. I focused on rebuilding my life, and although the pain never fully disappeared, I managed to find a new sense of normalcy. But then one day, after finishing work, I returned home to find my mother standing in front of my door. She was holding an invitation to Scott and Lauren's wedding. They had finally decided to make their relationship official and were brazen enough to invite our parents. "Mom, are you going to attend?" I asked, my voice trembling with the effort to remain calm. "Of course I am," she replied, her tone surprisingly calm. "But don't worry, I have a plan. Just wait and see." On the day of the wedding, my mother called me through a video call. I didn't want to watch, but I remembered her words and stayed on the line. As the wedding ceremony began, a slideshow was presented, featuring photos of the bride. The MC introduced the slides, saying they were a collection of photos from Lauren's birth to the present, lovingly prepared by the bride's mother. I was shocked when I saw the first photo. It wasn't of Lauren. it was of me. The slideshow continued, showing pictures from my childhood, my school days, and even my wedding to Scott. The guests began to murmur in confusion, while Lauren's expression grew increasingly panicked. Scott, too, realized what was happening, his face turning pale as the realization dawned on him. My mother took the stage, smoothly taking over the presentation. She recounted how I had supported Scott, both at work and at home, only to be betrayed by him and Lauren. She then revealed the truth to the stunned audience, showing the photo of Scott and Lauren entering the spa hotel together. The room fell into a shocked silence as the guests finally understood the depth of their deception. Lauren tried to stop her, pleading with her to let it go. But my mother was resolute. She made it clear that she could never forgive them for what they had done to me. She left the venue with my father, leaving behind a room full of people who now saw Scott and Lauren for who they truly were. That day, my mother did what I couldn't. She exposed their lies and made them face the consequences of their actions. When I spoke to her later, she apologized for bringing up painful memories, but I thanked her. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off my shoulders. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play. A few weeks later, during a company-wide presentation, I played the recording of my mother's speech at the wedding. As the truth about Scott's affair with Lauren was revealed to the entire company, the room erupted in whispers and accusations. Scott tried to defend himself, but it was too late. His reputation was in tatters, and everyone knew the real reason for our divorce. The board members, who had once seen Scott as a rising star, quickly turned against him. They informed him that he would be transferred to a remote office, effectively demoting him with plans to lay him off in the near future. Scott's career was over, and he had no one to blame but himself. As for Lauren, her life quickly unraveled as well. She had become a full-time housewife after marrying Scott, but when she learned about his transfer and demotion, she abandoned him without a second thought. She quickly latched onto another man, hoping to maintain her comfortable lifestyle. But this new man was a freeloader, and soon Lauren found herself drowning in debt, working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. Watching Scott and Lauren's lives fall apart brought me a sense of closure. Their betrayal had led to their downfall, and they were finally paying the price for their actions. With this closure, I was able to move on with my life, free from the shadows of the past. I focused on my career, taking on new challenges and receiving a promotion in recognition of my hard work. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and even started dating again. I also took time to explore hobbies I had neglected, like painting, which brought me a sense of peace and fulfillment. Years passed, and I found myself happier and more fulfilled than I had ever been. Scott and Lauren were distant memories, reminders of lessons learned but no longer sources of pain. Their lives, on the other hand, continued to be marked by the consequences of their actions. Scott drifted from one low-paying job to another, never recovering his career, while Lauren remained trapped in a cycle of financial struggle, burdened by her new partner's debts. In the end, I realized that true happiness comes from living with integrity and kindness. Betrayal and deceit bring only temporary satisfaction, followed by long-term suffering. By choosing to live my life with honesty and compassion, I found the peace and happiness I had been seeking all along. And as I looked toward the future, I knew I was finally free to build a life on my own terms, without the weight of betrayal holding me back.